At 7:42 a.m. on August 17, 1943, Technical Sergeant James McKenna knelt beneath the left wing of a P-38 Lightning at Dobadura Airfield in New Guinea. He watched as Lieutenant Robert Hayes climbed into the cockpit for a mission that, statistically, he was unlikely to survive. Hayes was 23 years old. 6 combat missions completed. No victories. That morning, intelligence reported 18 Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters inbound to intercept the patrol. Hayes would fly straight into them. McKenna had been servicing P-38s for 8 months. He knew every cable, pulley, and panel of the twin-engine fighter. The Lightning was fast, especially at altitude. Its twin-boom design gave it stability in a dive. In straight-line speed, it could outrun almost anything in the Pacific theater. But it had one lethal weakness. It could not turn with a zero. The Japanese fighter was lighter and more agile. In a horizontal turning fight, the Zero could complete a full circle in roughly half the time required by a P-38. That difference was not academic. It was fatal. American doctrine was clear. Never engage a Zero in a turning fight. Use altitude. Dive from above. Fire. Climb out. Repeat. Speed was survival. Hayes had followed that doctrine 5 times. It had not produced results. Japanese pilots adapted quickly. They baited Americans into defensive turns, then cut inside their radius and settled onto their tails. Once that happened, escape became unlikely. In the previous 6 weeks, the 5th Air Force had lost 37 P-38s. Many of those losses followed the same pattern. Caught in turning engagements they could not escape. McKenna had watched too many pilots disappear. They arrived confident. They climbed into their aircraft. Some returned. Others did not. Official reports attributed the losses to pilot error, failure to adhere to doctrine. Instructors insisted that proper energy management would prevent fatal engagements. McKenna disagreed. The problem was not the pilots. It was the control cables. The P-38's aileron cables ran through the twin booms, routed via pulleys to the control surfaces. The system contained a small amount of slack, within factory tolerance, perhaps 3/8 of an inch of play at full deflection. On paper, insignificant. In combat, decisive. That fraction of slack introduced a slight delay between stick input and aileron response. At cruising speed, the lag was barely noticeable. In high-speed dives, it mattered little. But during low-speed, hard-turning maneuvers, the exact conditions of a dogfight, it created hesitation. A fraction of a second. Enough time for a Zero to slip inside a turn. Enough time to line up a shot. McKenna had raised the issue with the engineering officer 2 months earlier. The answer was predictable. Cable tension was within specification. Factory tolerances allowed for minor slack. Field mechanics were not authorized to alter flight control systems. Lockheed engineers in California, 7,000 miles away, would decide such matters. Regulations were clear. McKenna decided to ignore them. From a damaged aircraft awaiting scrapping, he salvaged a 6-inch piece of high-tensile piano wire. He bent it carefully into a Z shape and used it as an inline tensioner on Hayes's left aileron cable. The modification took 8 minutes. It added roughly 4/10 of a pound of tension. It eliminated the slack entirely. No inspection crew noticed. That morning, checks focused on oil levels, ammunition loads, and fuel. McKenna said nothing. He watched Hayes taxi to the runway, watched the Lightning lift off, watched it disappear toward Japanese airspace. What happened in the next 17 minutes would change how P-38s flew across the Pacific. The first pilot McKenna had lost to a Zero was Lieutenant David Chen. July 9th, 1943. Chen had been in theater barely 3 weeks. McKenna serviced his aircraft every morning. They spoke about California. Chen from Sacramento, McKenna from Long Beach. Both had worked on cars before the war. That morning, Chen launched at 6:15 a.m. on a fighter sweep. 2 hours later, he returned with 3 bullet holes punched cleanly through his left boom and a story that unsettled McKenna. A Zero had gotten inside his turn. Chen described trying to roll out and dive away exactly as the manual instructed. But the airplane felt slow, delayed, as though it hesitated between stick movement and response. The Zero nearly finished him. Only his wingman's intervention saved his life. McKenna examined the bullet impacts. Tight grouping. Perfect deflection shooting. The Zero pilot had predicted exactly where Chen's aircraft would be. That prediction should have failed if Chen's rollout had been immediate, unless there had been just enough delay. Chen's aircraft was sent back for repairs. He later died flying a different P-38 over Rabaul. The official report cited pilot error during defensive maneuvering. The second loss hit harder. Captain William Morrison, flight leader, 11 kills, experienced and cautious. On August 3rd, Morrison's flight intercepted 8 Zeros over Oro Bay at 12,000 feet. He downed one on the first pass. As he came around for a second attack, 2 Zeros reversed into him. Morrison attempted to roll inverted and split S out of danger. Radio traffic later revealed his final words. The controls felt mushy. The Zeros stayed glued to him through the maneuver and shot him down at 4,000 feet. His crew chief, Rodriguez, inspected the wreckage. Everything was within specification. Engine performance normal, cable tension within limits, control surfaces properly rigged. The report again concluded pilot error. By mid-August, McKenna had watched 17 pilots die. Some he knew well, others only briefly. But he had worked on all their aircraft. He began paying attention to something small, the sound of control cables, when tensioned during maintenance. Plucked lightly, they produced a tone. Properly tight cables rang differently than loose ones. Every P-38 on the line sounded slightly loose, within specification, but loose. He mentioned it to Rodriguez one evening after Morrison's death. Rodriguez asked what could be done. McKenna replied that officially, nothing could be changed. Unofficially, perhaps something could. It would risk court-martial. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Robert Hayes continued flying missions. 23 years old, farm kid from Iowa, 6 missions. No victories. Not because he lacked skill, because he obeyed the rules. On his third mission, Hayes dove from altitude onto a Zero, built speed to 400 miles per hour, approached from the sun. The Zero snap-rolled and dove away. Hayes rolled to follow. The airplane felt heavy. By the time it responded, the Zero had vanished. Fourth mission. Hayes and his wingman engaged 2 Zeros at 15,000 feet. Hayes missed his first burst. The Zero reversed sharply. Hayes rolled to pursue. His wingman warned of additional Zeros diving in. Hayes tried to roll level and dive out. The aircraft responded slowly. Just slow enough for a Zero to land a 3-second burst into his right boom. The shells failed to penetrate, but the message was clear. The lightning could not reverse quickly enough. On August 14th, Hayes watched his wingman, Lieutenant Thomas Parker, die. 2 Zeros got behind Parker during a dogfight. Parker attempted scissors maneuvers, reversals, desperate rolls. Over the radio, Hayes heard Parker say the aircraft wasn't turning fast enough. Then gunfire. Then silence. Maintenance logs listed no mechanical defects. McKenna had signed off on Parker's aircraft that morning. Everything was within spec. But Parker was dead. The slack in those cables, insignificant on paper, had cost lives. And McKenna knew it. On the evening of August 16th, Hayes walked into the maintenance area and found McKenna working beneath his assigned P-38. Hayes did not ask about doctrine. He asked if there was anything at all, that could make the airplane roll faster. He said he did not care whether it was authorized. He just wanted a chance. McKenna looked at him and saw exhaustion layered over fear. Hayes knew the numbers. He knew how many pilots had not returned. McKenna told him to come back in the morning. That night, after 2300, when the hangar had emptied and generators hummed in the distance, McKenna went back to work. The tropical air hung heavy. Insects bounced against overhead lights. The scent of oil and fuel lingered in the stillness. He removed the inspection panel from the left boom. Inside, the aileron cable ran through pulleys toward the tail. He grabbed it and pulled. There it was. That slight give before tension caught. 3/8 of an inch. He reached into his tool bag and removed the 6-inch piece of piano wire salvaged weeks earlier from a damaged aircraft. He bent it carefully into a Z shape. The wire resisted, stiff and springy. His hand slipped once, slicing his thumb. He wiped the blood on his coveralls and continued. The bend had to be exact. The Z-shape would function as a simple inline tensioner, adding preload to the cable, removing slack. Installation required working in cramped space with one hand holding a flashlight. He disconnected the cable at the pulley junction, dropped the clevis pin, spent minutes searching in darkness to retrieve it. His heart pounded. Unauthorized modification of a flight control system could mean court-martial. If the tensioner failed in flight, Hayes would crash, and McKenna would carry that responsibility. But if he did nothing, Hayes would likely die anyway. He inserted the wire tensioner, reconnected the cable, forced the clevis pin back into place. Then he pulled on the cable again. No slack. Immediate response. The control surface moved the instant tension was applied. He replaced the inspection panel, cleaned his tools, and left the hangar at 1:15. He did not sleep. At 6:30, he stood on the flight line as Hayes's aircraft was fueled and armed. At 7:42, Hayes took off. McKenna watched the P-38 climb and join formation with 16 others. Then he waited. The engagement began at 8:14 over the Huon Gulf. Hayes's four-ship element intercepted 9 zeros at 13,000 feet. The sun favored the Americans. Hayes selected a zero at the rear of the formation and dove, building speed to 380 miles per hour. The aircraft felt stable. He lined up the shot and fired. Tracers streaked out. Some struck the wing, but the zero snap-rolled and dove. Hayes rolled to follow and felt something different. The lightning responded instantly. No hesitation, no mushy delay. The stick moved, and the aircraft rolled immediately. 90 degrees in what felt like half the usual time. The zero remained in his gun sight. He fired again. A 3-second burst. Rounds walked from tail to cockpit. The zero exploded and fell trailing smoke. His first kill. But there was no time to process it. 3 additional zeros dove from above. Hayes pushed throttles forward and began climbing, but the zeros were faster in the dive. They would overtake him. He had to reverse. Every instinct told him to extend and run. Instead, he rolled hard left and pulled. The P-38 snapped through the turn. The lead Zero had not anticipated such a rapid reversal. Hayes pulled lead and fired. The Zero's wing separated. 2 kills. The remaining Zeros attempted scissors maneuvers, alternating turns to force an overshoot. Hayes stayed with them. Every reversal, the Lightning responded immediately. No lag, no fight against sluggish controls. It felt like flying a different aircraft. 1 Zero over-rotated, bled too much energy. Hayes slid inside the turn at close range and fired. The aircraft disintegrated. 3 kills in 7 minutes. The 4th Zero disengaged. Hayes did not pursue. Fuel was low. At 9:03, he landed. McKenna waited beside the runway. Hayes shut down, climbed out, hands shaking. He walked straight to McKenna and said only 2 words. It worked. 6 other pilots had witnessed Hayes's engagement from higher altitude. Among them was Captain Frank Mitchell, a flight leader in the 475th Fighter Group. From 15,000 feet, Mitchell had watched Hayes's Lightning roll and reverse with unusual speed. He knew the aircraft well. He knew its limitations. Hayes was competent, but the maneuvering he displayed went beyond pilot skill alone. After landing, Mitchell approached Hayes during debrief. "What was different?" he asked. Hayes shrugged. "The airplane just felt sharper," he said. "Like it moved the second I told it to." Mitchell pressed further. "Had maintenance done anything?" Hayes directed him to McKenna. Mitchell found McKenna 2 hours later in the maintenance area, hands covered in grease. "What did you change?" Mitchell asked directly. McKenna hesitated, then explained. "The slack in the aileron cables, the piano wire tensioner, the 8-minute modification that violated regulations but removed delay." Mitchell listened carefully. Then he asked one question. "Can you do it to mine?" McKenna warned him. Unauthorized flight control modification could lead to charges. If something failed mid-flight, the consequences would be catastrophic. Mitchell didn't hesitate. "I've buried 4 pilots this month," he said. "Do it." That evening, McKenna installed the same tensioner on Mitchell's P-38. The next day, Mitchell flew. He returned enthusiastic. "The airplane rolls like a fighter now," he told his wingmen. Word began spreading. By August 20th, McKenna had modified 9 aircraft. Pilots quietly asked their crew chiefs about the cable fix. Some mechanics refused. Regulations were clear. Others were willing to try. The process was simple. Cut piano wire, bend into a Z. Install as inline tensioner. 8 minutes. The change was invisible from the outside. No paperwork. No official authorization. Just whispered conversations in hangars and ready rooms. Hayes scored 2 more kills on August 22nd. Mitchell shot down 3 on August 25th. Other pilots began returning with victories. The numbers shifted. In July, P-38 units in the Southwest Pacific had been losing nearly 2 aircraft for every Zero destroyed. By late August, the ratio dropped dramatically. By September, it approached parity. The engineering officer at Dobodura noticed inconsistencies in cable tension during routine checks, but inspections never revealed the modification. Crew chiefs removed tensioners before formal inspections and reinstalled them afterward. The officers remained unaware. Meanwhile, the Japanese began noticing changes. Reports from the 11th Air Fleet described P-38s maneuvering more aggressively, reversing faster, rolling more sharply into turns. Tactics that had worked reliably for months suddenly failed. Japanese pilots could not understand why. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's most accomplished aces, experienced the shift firsthand. On September 3, 1943, Sakai engaged a P-38 over Wewak. He employed his standard tactic: draw the American into a turning fight, then snap reverse inside the Lightning's slower roll. Except the P-38 reversed with him. Sakai barely avoided collision. The American gained firing position. Sakai dove away, shaken. He had calculated the timing perfectly, based on months of experience fighting P-38s. But the aircraft had responded faster than expected. Other veteran Japanese pilots reported similar encounters. The Americans were not flying differently. The airplanes were. The change was subtle, fractional, but enough to disrupt timing. And in aerial combat, timing is everything. Japanese intelligence attempted to determine what had changed. They examined wreckage from downed P-38s, inspected engines, armament configurations, and structural components. Nothing appeared different. The twin Allison engines were the same. The 4.50 caliber machine guns and single 20mm cannon were unchanged. No new aerodynamic modifications were visible. The aircraft looked identical. What they could not see was hidden inside the boom, a 6-inch piece of piano wire acting as a tension preload on the aileron cable. Even if discovered, its purpose would not have been immediately obvious. It was not a new weapon, not additional horsepower, just a minor mechanical refinement. But that refinement altered control response by fractions of a second. Fractions that determined survival. By mid-September, Japanese fighter units began losing aircraft to P-38s at rates they had not experienced since early in the war. The psychological impact was significant. For nearly 2 years, Zero pilots had relied on superior maneuverability to dominate turning engagements. That confidence began eroding. Pilots who previously pressed attacks aggressively became cautious. Some attempted to avoid turning engagements with P-38s altogether, but that meant surrendering their primary tactical advantage. The Zero excelled in close maneuvering combat. Fighting at speed favored the heavier American aircraft. Other Japanese pilots attempted greater aggression, closing distance rapidly before firing, but that tactic increased exposure and losses. Several experienced aviators were killed in September, while attempting maneuvers that had worked flawlessly in July. The fundamental issue was that they were fighting an invisible change. You cannot adapt to a modification you do not know exists. By the end of September, the 11th Air Fleet had lost 38 fighters in engagements with P-38s. American losses during the same period were 22. The ratio had reversed. For the first time in the Pacific War, the P-38 was achieving superior exchange rates against the Zero. Japanese command issued instructions to avoid engaging P-38s unless numerical superiority was overwhelming. The Zero, once hunter, had become prey. And the cause was a small mechanical adjustment no engineer had officially approved. The modification remained unofficial for months. In October 1943, a maintenance inspector at Dobodura noticed irregular cable tension readings during routine checks. Investigation traced the discrepancy to the piano wire tensioners. A report was forwarded up the chain of command. For 3 weeks, officers debated the implications. The modification clearly violated regulations. Field mechanics were not authorized to alter flight control systems. but squadrons using the tensioner demonstrated measurable improvements in survival and combat performance. The question was no longer whether it worked. The question was whether to punish those who implemented it or quietly legitimize it. In November, Lockheed dispatched engineers to New Guinea. They examined modified aircraft, measured cable loads, calculated stress tolerances, and conducted flight tests. Their conclusion was straightforward. The modification was safe. It should have been incorporated from the beginning. Subsequent P-38J production models integrated improved control tension systems based on engineering evaluation. Official documentation credited the improvement to Lockheed engineering analysis. McKenna's name appeared nowhere. There were no commendations, no formal acknowledgement. The piano wire tensioner remained a footnote, if that. But the pilots remembered. Hayes survived the war. He flew 63 combat missions and shot down 11 Japanese aircraft. He returned to Iowa in 1945, married, raised 4 children, and worked as a crop duster for decades. Every August 17th, he called McKenna to thank him. Mitchell also survived, eventually commanding a squadron and retiring as a colonel in 1963. He told young maintenance officers about the importance of listening to enlisted mechanics. Sometimes, he said, the solution comes from the man holding the wrench. By late September 1943, the transformation in the Pacific Air War was impossible to ignore. Squadrons equipped with modified P-38s were reporting higher survival rates. Engagement reports increasingly described American pilots successfully reversing on zeros, something that had previously been considered nearly impossible in horizontal turning fights. What changed was not horsepower. It was responsiveness. Aileron authority in close maneuvering improved just enough to allow pilots to snap into reversals faster, roll out of scissors engagements without hesitation, and hold a tighter line when pulling lead on a crossing target. The difference, measured in fractions of a second, translated directly into firing solutions. Pilots described the sensation similarly. The airplane does what I tell it immediately. It feels lighter. It rolls like it should have from the beginning. The improvement was subtle but decisive. In combat, predictability matters. Japanese pilots had built their timing around known lightning characteristics. When a P-38 entered a roll, experienced Zero pilots could anticipate its lag and exploit it. Remove that lag, and the timing collapses. The lightning no longer hesitated. It reacted. In dogfights, that reaction meant survival. Meanwhile, the engineering officer at Dobodura Airfield noticed something else. Performance reports from squadrons using modified aircraft showed better kill ratios. Yet maintenance logs reflected no authorized alterations. Suspicion grew. Cable tension readings varied slightly between aircraft. Some planes felt tighter in control checks. Yet during formal inspections, no anomalies were found. Crew chiefs quietly removed tensioners before inspection cycles and reinstalled them afterward. The modification spread organically, mechanic to mechanic, pilot to pilot. No written directive, no formal approval, just results. Lockheed engineers, upon arrival in November, performed stress tests and flight evaluations. They measured the preload applied by the piano wire. Calculations showed that the additional tension remained within safe structural limits. In fact, the factory tolerances that allowed slack were conservative to simplify manufacturing and reduce maintenance complaints, not because slack improved performance. The field modification corrected a design compromise. In December 1943, updated P-38J models incorporated refinements to the control system. These included improved tensioning assemblies that effectively accomplished what McKenna's piano wire had done months earlier. Officially, the change was attributed to engineering analysis. Unofficially, mechanics in New Guinea already knew the truth. The improvement had begun with a technical sergeant kneeling in a hangar at night. McKenna returned to California in 1946 after the war ended. He resumed civilian life as a mechanic, opening a small garage in Long Beach. He rarely spoke about the piano wire. When asked about his service, he said only that he fixed airplanes. Hayes and Mitchell stayed in touch with him. Hayes called every August 17th. Mitchell referenced the modification whenever discussing innovation with younger officers. But there was no medal, no official citation. The war moved on. Aircraft evolved. Jet fighters replaced piston engines. Yet the lesson endured. Innovation in war often begins far from headquarters. It begins where problems are visible and immediate, on the flight line. In the hands of mechanics who hear cables twang differently and recognize that within specification does not always mean optimal. Between July and September 1943, survival rates improved in squadrons using the tensioner. Historians later estimated that the modification may have contributed to saving dozens, possibly close to 100, American pilots. McKenna never counted. He counted only the ones who came back. By early 1944, the Pacific Air War had shifted decisively. The P-38 was no longer seen as a vulnerable heavy fighter struggling against the Zero in close maneuvering. It had become one of the dominant aircraft in the theater. Pilots now entered engagements with confidence rather than caution. Much of that shift resulted from tactical evolution, better coordination, improved training, smarter energy management. But part of it came down to responsiveness. A fighter that reacts immediately to control input gives its pilot options, and options mean survival. The tensioner modification never appeared in official wartime communiques. It did not earn headlines. No press release announced that a small adjustment to a control cable had changed the tempo of aerial combat. Instead, it spread quietly, almost invisibly. Mechanics passed knowledge to each other in whispered conversations beside parked aircraft. Add the wire. Remove the slack. 8 minutes. The simplicity of the fix was part of its power. There were no new parts shipped from factories. No redesign requiring months of bureaucratic approval. Just a piece of piano wire salvaged from scrap. The Japanese never fully identified the cause of the shift. Reports noted American aircraft maneuvering more sharply. Some suspected pilot training improvements. Others speculated about hidden aerodynamic changes. But no official Japanese report pinpointed the cable tension modification. They fought an aircraft that felt slightly different, and that slight difference accumulated across engagements. Japanese aces, accustomed to exploiting predictable roll lag, found themselves out-timed. Scissor maneuvers no longer guaranteed overshoots. Reversal timing no longer ensured tail position. Confidence eroded. Once confidence erodes in a fighter force, aggression falters. The Zero had dominated turning fights since 1941. Now pilots hesitated before committing to close engagements with P-38s. Hesitation costs initiative. And in air combat, initiative is survival. Years later, historians analyzing squadron reports noted that the kill ratio improvement in late 1943 correlated strongly with squadrons that had adopted the tensioner. The correlation did not prove sole causation, but the pattern was difficult to ignore. Between August and October 1943, units equipped with modified Lightnings demonstrated measurable increases in successful reversals during defensive engagements. What changed was not pilot courage. It was mechanical timing. The P-38 had always possessed speed, firepower, and altitude performance. It had lacked immediacy in roll response. Remove the lag, and it became something else. McKenna never sought recognition. He continued working at his garage for decades after the war, tuning engines and adjusting carburetors with the same precision he once applied to control cables. In 1991, a military historian, researching field modifications, discovered references to unauthorized tensioners in maintenance logs from New Guinea. The historian tracked McKenna down. By then, he was 73 years old, still working part-time. When asked about the modification, he described it plainly. "It just needed tightening," he said. No dramatic language, no grand claims, just a mechanic solving a problem. The historian later estimated that the cable modification may have contributed to saving between 80 and 100 American pilots based on survival trends. McKenna never argued the numbers. He remembered only the pilots who walked away from dogfights that would have killed them weeks earlier. That was enough. James McKenna died in 2006 at the age of 88. His obituary mentioned his service as an aircraft mechanic in World War II. It did not mention the piano wire. It did not mention the unauthorized modification that altered how P-38s handled in combat. It did not mention the dozens of pilots who may have lived because of an 8-minute adjustment inside a boom. His garage in Long Beach still stands, under different ownership now. On the wall of the back office, a faded photograph remains. Young mechanic in grease-stained coveralls standing beside a P-38 Lightning in New Guinea. August 1943 is written on the back. That is how innovation often happens in war. Not through formal memos or engineering committees. Not through carefully approved redesigns. It happens on flight lines, in hangars, under wings at night, when someone who understands the machine better than anyone else sees a flaw that paperwork calls acceptable. Factory tolerance allowed slack. Combat did not. The P-38 Lightning was never redesigned in response to a single official directive acknowledging McKenna's fix. Instead, engineers quietly incorporated improvements in later production models. History recorded those changes as technical refinements. But before they became official, they were improvised. The Lightning pilots who survived late 1943 did not know about torque calculations or structural load analysis. They knew only that their aircraft responded faster. That when they rolled, it rolled immediately. That when they reversed, the nose came around without hesitation. In aerial combat, that hesitation can be fatal. The Zero had built its dominance on superior maneuverability. Japanese pilots relied on predictable American roll lag to time their reversals. Remove that predictability, and the entire equation shifts. A 6-inch piece of wire changed timing. Timing changed engagements. Engagements changed survival rates. And survival rates changed the course of squadrons operating across the Southwest Pacific. McKenna never received a medal for valor. He never appeared in official commendations. He returned home, fixed cars, raised a family, and rarely spoke of New Guinea. But every August 17th, Hayes called him. That call mattered more than any ribbon, because the story was never about glory. It was about responsibility. A mechanic who refused to accept that within specification was good enough. A decision made in a quiet hangar at night. A risk taken without permission. Sometimes the difference between life and death is not a new weapon or a new strategy. Sometimes it is a fraction of an inch. Sometimes it is the absence of delay. And sometimes it is a man willing to break the rules to save someone else's life.